I'm not gonna do my introduction like I usually do it. I'm far too tired to do that. I just need to go ahead and get several things off of my mind, because I know I won't be able to sleep if I don't do this. So here we go. First and foremost, I'm sorry that the video I hinted at back in June or July, whenever it was, is taking so long. I've had real life to deal with, and on top of that, I'll just go ahead and tell you what it was. It was going to be a theory video about Mortal Kombat 2. You'll see it, I don't know. I'm not sure when you'll see it. I'm not going to make another promise I can't keep. But I am going to make this video because this is something I've been wanting to do for a while. I'm sure some of you remember that last June 2017, I had spontaneously, out of nowhere, uploaded a video, a 45-minute or 48-minute and 36-second video, I think. 46-minute and 38-second video, whatever it was. Almost an hour worth of me just blowing up about Nintendo. And I've been meaning to make a reprisal of my thoughts, a calm, collected reprisal of my thoughts in that video. So here we are, over a year later. Now I'm going to provide the Pastebin that this is derived from in the description, as well as the Novni link, because I also anonymously posted this on a new website I just found. I'm going to post both those in the description. But anyways, this is going to be like my history with Nintendo, as well as what has happened in the more recent years, and why I don't support them anymore. So, it goes all the way back to when I was just 3, 4 years old. Two things I knew in life were Doom and Nintendo. There was the PlayStation, but there was mostly just my computer, my Windows 98, Windows 2000 computer, and the Super Nintendo. First game I ever saw in my life was Super Mario World, and my brother and I played that near non-stop. He knows all those games much better than I do, and he still does. There's no change to that. And that was my first experience. I didn't get to go back and play the original NES until a little bit later, when my uncle, my late uncle I should say, out of nowhere gave me his NES and Atari 2600. I just sort of half-jokingly asked him if I could have them, because we were playing them at his house, and he gave me that and the Atari 2600, so, yeah. And that was the first time, that NES was the first time, it's still in the family too, that NES was the first time I saw Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt. I saw a little bit of that. I saw Excite Bike. I saw Mach Rider. Ice Hockey. I saw a bunch of classic Nintendo games that I had previously not had access to, and not really ever heard of, nor cared of at that point, because I was a little kid. Going back to the Super Nintendo, that was when I was finally opened up to emulation on computers, this new idea of emulation. There were so many other games that I could play that I couldn't have previously played because I didn't have a physical copy of, like Super Metroid and Worms and Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 and several Dragon Ball Z games and several RPGs like Terra Enigma or Tenchi Sho, Soul Blazer, Seiken Densetsu 3, or Secret Mana 2 if you prefer. Numerous Super Nintendo, NES, and Genesis titles that I'd previously never gotten to play because I didn't have the physical hardware to play them on. again, to add to that list, Phantasy Star 3 for the Sega Genesis. Any and all Sonic games for the Sega Genesis. I couldn't freely access those, even though my cousin who lives up in Pennsylvania, he at one point had a Sega Genesis and all those games for it. He had Sonic Spinball, and he had a demo for Sonic 1 back when there were still demo carts and demo discs for those back in the day. But I digress. My next Nintendo experience up from that was actually briefly with the Nintendo 64 at one of my friend's house in the neighborhood. And that was the first time I got to see the Nintendo 64. I got to play Ocarina of Time for the first time, which I thought was mind-blowing. I was a little kid, early 2000s, and I thought this was awesome. I'd never seen a 3D Zelda game before, to my recollection. And I thought that was cool. When we weren't playing Halo 2, we were messing around in Ocarina of Time in the Kokiri Village, well, what I later learned was the Kokiri Village. And not long after that, after he moved away, I learned that there was emulation for the Nintendo 64. So again, I got to play more and more games that I previously hadn't had access to. Super Mario 64, Mega Man 64, which was just Mega Man Legends, Super Smash Brothers, which I actually ended up playing at another friend's house. You can just read I'm going over this briefly. You can read the full details below whenever I post this. After that, my other cousins that actually live a little closer by, a while back, they had a Nintendo GameCube complete with Game Boy Player and Super Smash Bros. Melee. I played that a lot. Every time we were over there, it was Super Smash Bros. Melee or Mario Kart Double Dash, because they also had that. And that is my favorite entry in the Mario Kart series, just for the record. Just above Mario Kart DS, since that's the Mario Kart I actually spent the most time playing, including online play through Nintendo's now defunct Wi-Fi on the original DS. Now, skipping way ahead to about 2013, there was a website that cropped up called fullscreenmario.com, if I remember. And basically it was the premise of the website was that it was the complete NES version of Super Mario Brothers, but it had been, converted into Flash or whatever it was, whatever front or back end it was using, with an added twist, which is that with this new front end, there is an inbuilt level editor where users could create and share custom levels that they created through a connected database to other players around the world. Now, of course, Nintendo saw this and sent a DMCA takedown notice to the website. If you guys don't know what that is, it is a fancy way of saying they sent a cease and desist letter, basically meaning stop what you're doing and don't do it again, letter to the owner of the website, and so he had to shut the website down. The binaries are still available online if anybody is curious. I'll put those in the description. In fact, I'll link everything in the description that I'm going to talk about. And so that bothered me, I thought that was a cool idea, and what bothered me further was that Nintendo, just a few months down the road, I think it was like March or something of that following year, or something like that, they announced Super Mario Maker, which had an uncannily similar premise, sorry, I'm tired, to Full Screen Mario. Well, I didn't think much of that project being shut down at that time, but I should have honestly taken the warning signs there. But I didn't, I kept supporting Nintendo. I actually had bought a couple of their games in that time to show support for them, including but not limited to Breath of the Wild more recently. I actually bought a copy of that for the Nintendo Wii U, since that's their latest console that I happen to have in my possession. And also Triforce Heroes. Anyways, so that was the first warning sign I should have taken. But then the second one, which is the most recent one, which was the main topic, the main fuss in the old 2017 video, which was that they canceled a project I had been closely following for many, many years. It was probably like 4 or 5 years at minimum, because the project I think started in 2012, called Another Metroid 2 Remake. What's the word I'm looking for? Abbreviated appropriately as AM2R. Now, they had shut this project down. This and also another project called Pokemon Uranium Edition. Now, both projects had collectively a decade's plus worth of effort put into them, and I want you to remember that for later. And just a couple months down the road, Nintendo not only announces, that they're going to be expanding upon Sun and Moon with Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. I think that was the next games they announced after that. But they also announced, aside from a continuation of the Prime series, Metroid Prime 4, which doesn't have the original development team working on it, by the way, but they also announced a remake of Metroid 2 called Metroid Samus Returns. I heard that name from my brother when he told me that they had their E3 recently. Last year. Last June 2017. I heard that, and suddenly I lost it. I saw red, for lack of better words. My voice is as raspy now as it was then. That's how raspy my voice was after that video, even. And I lost it. I yelled, I screamed, I ruined my voice out of just how angry I was, how disgusted I was. The only thing I could think was just how abhorrent Nintendo was. I used to have a semblance of respect for them, hoping that they would do something good, but that told me right then and there that they weren't learning anything, and that they are just going to keep doing this. So I stepped away. I just couldn't support them anymore. I don't see any reason to support Nintendo anymore. It just doesn't click with me. More than that, it's because Nintendo's explanation for why they shut the projects down, specifically AM2R, but I believe this was their public statement on that, is because they see fan games as a hindrance upon, official sales. But the thing is, and I kind of briefly brought this up in the other video, though not as well and with a lot more swearing, the only reason that a fan game could potentially hinder upon the sales of the original, a published game from the original creators, is if the fan game does everything better and addresses everything better than what the official product does. That's the only way that I can see that it would take the attention away from the official product, is if it was better than the official product. And in AM2R's case, like I said, it had been worked on for about 6 years or so. So there was 6 years, almost a decade worth of work behind it. And Pokemon Uranium was worked on for a decade plus. It was worked on for over a decade. And I would not have been bothered by it as much if they had shut the projects down in their early stages of development. If they had, shut them down before any of the work had been put into them. Again, I said this in the other video. But it almost seems like they deliberately waited for the projects to be finished and released to finally send these DMCAs. It just, the consistency with it, how these projects were released and then the DMCAs finally came at them, it just seems a little too convenient that that would happen at that specific time. But they decided to wait until all the effort had been put into it. These people, they love these series, and they were putting their hard work, their time into these series. They're not getting that time back. They won't recuperate or be compensated for the time of their life that they lost. I wouldn't even say that it was well sacrificed. I'd say that that was wasted. You know, for them to just be shunned by Nintendo like this. I want to believe in my heart of hearts that Nintendo is a good company, but day after day, Nintendo and a bunch of other companies, but day after day I'm consistently proven wrong. Konami's not showing any signs of being better. Nintendo wasn't showing any signs of being better. Sony really isn't showing any signs of being better. Even Microsoft isn't showing many good signs of being better. I couldn't care less about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I couldn't care less about the game market, you know, as of recently. That's partially why I'm trapped in the 1990s and the early 2000s. That's why I prefer those games to the games now, because there was a serious amount of love and affection put into them. It wasn't just putting stuff together and compiling code for the sake of wanting, like, what am I going to get back for this? You know, it was, I don't care what I get back for this. I'm putting as much goddamn effort into it as I see. I'm putting all of my goddamn effort into this as if it's my last fucking game, as if I'm going to die tomorrow. I'm going to put all the effort I can into it because I actually care about the quality of the game. But it's not like that anymore. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, to me, is the same sort of gimmick as Mortal Kombat Armageddon was in 2006 or 7, whenever it was released. It's just lobbing a bunch of characters together in one giant mosh pit and expecting it to work out. I don't think it's that appealing. Just all those characters being together. It's not appealing anymore. I would rather them work on another F-Zero game, or heck, I would personally just rather them work on anything other than Super Smash Bros. Or Mario or Animal Crossing or Zelda. I would rather those companies find some of their old IPs, brush the dust off of them, and actually do something fantastic with them. But I don't see that happening. I don't. Now, as I've said before, Nintendo isn't the only company that's culpable of this, of, you know, neglecting their fans and shunning them like this, but they are, in my observations, in my humble opinion, the worst offenders, because they have amassed such a large fan base over their hundreds of years of service. And I mean that literally. They started off as a toy making company back in the 1800s, and so they have generations upon generations of you know, support from people because of that nostalgic value, especially though because of the 1970s into the 1990s and early 2000s with the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Advance SP, Micro, DS lineup. You know, people have a lot of nostalgia for Nintendo, and that's why they can get away with this repugnant behavior, because they know that they will suffer literally zero losses from it. They can get off of it scot-free. And that's why I think that's why I see Nintendo as the worst company when it comes to that. That's why I see them as the worst offender. Because of that. Because unlike Konami, and unlike Capcom, and unlike Sony and Squaresoft, they all have nostalgic value, but I would argue that none of them hold a candle to Nintendo. Because without Nintendo, none of those other companies would have had a foothold in the gaming market. Nintendo provided an outlet for those companies to go and make games. It's because of Nintendo that games like Castlevania, it is directly because of Nintendo that games like Castlevania and the Mega Man series, game series like Castlevania and Mega Man and Blaster Master, and even to an extent, you know, more obscure series like Prince of Persia. Reasons why games like those were so mass-produced and mass-marketed and put on everything, because they started off on Nintendo and got very popular. So that's why Nintendo, I believe, is the worst offender, is because they were the gateway for these companies, and they were the gateway for a lot of nostalgia. So for them to turn around and do this it's disrespectful. It's spitting in the eyes of the fans. It's biting the hand that feeds them, so to speak. My voice is so destroyed by now, but I still have a bit to go over. And it's this dishonesty, this facade they put on, this act they have, that bothers me the most. Like, and it was not long after I made that video that the realization set in. I just kind of looked at Nintendo and I saw right through everything. I saw Nintendo and heck, every company for what it truly was. They weren't in it for the quality of the games anymore or the experience, even though Satoru Iwata, the former president of Nintendo, who, God bless his soul, passed away, a couple of years ago now. He said that the first thing, that the base of every game is that it has to be enjoyable. I don't think Nintendo cares about that anymore. I mean, that's still there, obviously. It seems like people enjoy Super Mario Odyssey, but it's blind enjoyment, because they aren't, not everybody is like me. You can call me crazy or whatever, but I just like to think that I am doing the right thing, that I am doing the instinctual thing, the noble thing, by peeling back the layers of a company and studying the company itself, and seeing what they are, seeing that I might have enjoyed the company's products in the past, but did I really ever have a respect for that company? Honestly, I wonder if I really ever cared about Nintendo as a company, and just liked their games. Honestly, the more I think about that, the more I see it as true. I never really respected Nintendo as a company. Maybe in the far-off past, when I was a little kid. But even little kid me didn't care about the company. He just cared about the games and having fun. And, ladies and gentlemen, that's what brings me to this point, that I'm sick too, by the way. I've been sick with a cold for the past 3-4 now days, I think. So, that's fun. I'm in remission right now, but still, that's part of why my voice is so horrible right now. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, we've made it to the crux of this video, that I don't support Nintendo because they put on this facade of loving their fans and having an appreciation for their fans, but the truth is they don't care. Like every other company, they've devolved into just caring about the profit and not about legitimately anything else. I could even put Sega above Nintendo, which is ironic because I used to think Sega was worse than Nintendo, but you know what? In terms of everything, Sega has actually made a bit of a comeback because they've seen the potential that fans have, that the creativity of fans' minds have. They hired Christian Whitehead and several other fans. The team that made Sonic Mania, that pitched the idea of Sonic Mania to Sega, was a group of fans. That was not Sega themselves. That was a group of fans that pitched to Sega, and they were on board. They saw the potential money that could be made with a game like that, with fan input. Nintendo doesn't care about that. And you can argue whatever you want. You can even argue, well, Nintendo, you can even remind me of the point that Nintendo claims that they did not even know of either AM2R's or Pokemon Uranium's existences up until like a year ago or so. And I don't believe that for a second, because word gets around the internet very quickly. And it spreads far and wide like a disease unrivaled in its category. Like the most hellish disease you've ever seen. Its information spreads. So I find it increasingly unlikely. In fact, I find it that the idea that anyone could believe that Nintendo didn't know about the project's existences up until a couple of years ago, up until it was already too late. The fact that they could say that, I think that anyone who believes that, it's downright asinine to believe that. There's no way that Nintendo could have not known about these projects existing. These and many other projects that have been made. And just to reiterate that point one last time, they already put their effort into these projects. You know, days, weeks, months, years, decades of work into these projects. That's lifespan. That's a span of their life that they are never going to get back. And it was a span of their life that was ultimately wasted, in my opinion anyways. My humble opinion was wasted. Because they ultimately had to hide their work and pretend like it didn't exist in the eyes of Nintendo. That's all I really wanted to talk about in this video. That's all I wanted to say. Not really much else I wanted to say. I just wanted to focus on Nintendo in this video. I just wanted to say that, you know, I loved their games in the past, and I'll continue to enjoy their games of the past. Like Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. I have all those games sitting on my shelf. Mother 2, I have an in-box copy of that sitting on my shelf too. What other games am I forgetting? Super Mario World, Super Mario Brothers 1 through 3, Super Mario Land 1 through 3, Super Mario 64, all the Mario Kart games. I will forever enjoy the games of their past, because it reminds me that they used to be great. And that is a great and terrible reminder. Because it not only reminds me that, you know, of how great those games were, but it reminds me that the company that fathered these games, or mothered these games, whichever you prefer, the company that created these games created so many different experiences for my feeble little youth mind. Used to be at least a much more respectable, much more reputable company. But then again, you know, I go back to this thing of wondering, were they really that respectable? Were they really that reputable in their past? I mean, when you think about it, why did they create the Super Nintendo? They created it because the Sega, or Service Games, if you like, had released their Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis, in 1989 to combat the Nintendo Entertainment System. The Sega Genesis was a 16-bit console, and it was far more powerful than the original NES. Much like how the NES was a little bit stronger than the Sega Mark I and the Sega Master System by a slim margin. So what did Nintendo do? They had to outdo Sega to keep up the competition. So they put all of their time and resources towards developing the Super Nintendo, even so much as to go behind Sony's back and I don't know how that worked out, but the reason why the Super Nintendo's audio chip is so godlike is because it didn't use pre-made like MIDI samples like the NES did or the Sega Genesis did. You had to put in your own samples, and so you could use CD quality samples on the sound chip in the game, which is why music on the Super Nintendo looked so great. And they put all their time and resources into making sure that the sounds and the graphics of the Super Nintendo were superior to the Sega Genesis, and in every way they are, in my opinion. Sega had to release the 32X to have 3D graphics. Nintendo did that with a single chip, the Super Mario FX chip, or the Super FX chip for short. developed actually by Argonaut Software, or Argonaut Games, if you will. The same people that developed the original Star Fox, as well as developing Croc, Legend of the Godless, and Croc 2. You know, those games. After they left Nintendo. The point is, they dumped their resources into making sure that the Super Nintendo was a graphically and audio powerful system was superior to the Sega Genesis. The only area that it failed in was processor. It had a slightly inferior processor, and I mean very slightly inferior processor to the one that was in the Sega Genesis. Hence, Sega having blast processing. It's just a 90s term. It just literally meant that the Sega had a 6.6 megahertz processor, and the Nintendo, I think, only had a 5 megahertz processor or something like that. I forgot what the exact number was, but I think it was something like that. But I honestly don't notice a difference. The games look about the same to me. And even into the Nintendo 64, Nintendo again dumped their resources into making sure that the Nintendo 64 was a powerful system. Its only setback, though, is that Nintendo decided to stick with cartridges rather than moving up to CD, rather than having a CD-based console like the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. In fact, the Sony PlayStation, as some of you may know, started off as a Nintendo console called the Nintendo PlayStation, or the Project Play Station. And it was supposed to be a CD-based add-on for the Super Nintendo, originally the Super CD, and then they made it their own system, and then Sony originally just made it their own unique system. If the Nintendo 64 was CD-based instead of cartridge-based and still had all that expansion stuff, it probably would have been a million times better, in my opinion. And in fact, I still think the PlayStation's graphics outdid the Nintendo 64's in several ways. Games like Tomb Raider, for example, looked so pretty on the PlayStation. Even Toy Story 2 and stuff like that, but I digress. I'm not here to argue, little things like that. And again, the GameCube. Nintendo was always about putting the graphics... You're noticing a trend here. Graphics before anything else. They put the graphics, the power of the system itself, before the actual quality of the games that they would later produce for the system. I don't think they ever truly cared about the quality of the games they were working on. Just as long as they looked good, just as long as they were admissible in the fun factor, the diversity, and the graphics. As long as they were admissible in those things, I don't think they cared much beyond that. I've noticed that Super Mario 64 might have been a great game for its time, and Ocarina of Time may have been a fantastic adventure game for its time, but they aren't that great nowadays. I mean, I still love Ocarina of Time, near and dear to my heart. That's a game from my childhood, just like Link to the Past. But I don't think it's that great of a game. I don't think either of them are that great of a game. Heck, I like Super Mario Sunshine and a bunch of games for the GameCube. I don't think they're fantastic games by any means. In fact, I think, to quote a story I read recently from Mr. Creepypasta, I dared my best friend to ruin my life. Actually, I think it was Creepypasta. Correct me if I'm wrong. I dared my best friend to ruin my life. One of the things that both main characters say throughout the story, or rather is just said throughout the story by the main antagonist, is you need to increase your minimum required effort. Well, Nintendo never bothered to increase that minimum required effort. They were just always doing the minimum required effort and getting by on that. They had a good system which allowed them to make high quality, high graphic games for it. Super Mario World was not great compared to Super Mario Bros. 3 on the older system, and Super Mario Bros. 3 was on the NES. It had, 8-bit graphics. Everything about the game was 8-bit, but yet it was a better game. It was a much more enjoyable experience. In fact, most games on the Super Nintendo, or on the NES, were much better than the SNES. They required actual skill. On the SNES was created, and I would argue even the Nintendo 64 were created for the sole purpose of competition. Nintendo knew that if they didn't conform to, what every other company was doing, they were going to sink. And that's why I can't support them anymore. It's because they've conformed to that. They've become what they used to. They've become the very thing they hate. They've become the very thing I hate with every company. Avarice, gluttony, sloth, wrath, all those things. They've become about 3 or 4 of the 7 deadly sins there. So I hope in my heart of hearts that's cleared up, all this stuff. I hope that that's explained. I've explained in a little better detail why I don't like Nintendo. Like I said, I'll include my Pastebin and the anonymous post thing I did. I'll include all of that in the description below. I'm not even going to bother putting my outro or anything in this video. I'm just going to end it. I hope you guys, God bless all of you that still watch my channel. God bless every single one of you. I'm going through tough times right now. I hopefully will have a job here in a little bit. I know I said that I had a job at some point. I quit that job because it was horrible. You don't need to know the details. Just know that I hated it, and I'm pretty sure everyone there hated me. Anyways, that's it. I don't want to exhaust myself any further. My voice hurts. I'm sick. I'm tired. It's 2:09 in the morning. I need to get rest. I have a thing to go to tomorrow to seal the deal for my job. God bless all of you. I hope that at the very least I've given a bit of a fresh perspective on Nintendo as a company, on most companies nowadays, most of the gaming industry in modern times. I hope I've given at most I've given a fresh perspective on it, or at the very least I've given people something to think about, because that's I feel like that's all I want to do, is I want to leave an impact, but sometimes I wonder. Anyways, I don't have anything else to say. Thank you for listening. God bless. Have a good day, good night, whenever you happen to be watching this. Have a good one. And I sure do hope to see you guys in the very next video. Goodbye. Well, it turns out I'm not done yet. I'm back for one more thing. Because I was not able to sleep after I finished recording that from my camera. I couldn't sleep. I just kind of laid there. It's now 3:12 in the morning. I'm probably going to be up for the rest of the night, as far as I can see. I figured I would just dump the last bit of thoughts that I got down and put this up there for all of you. Something I failed to mention in my ramblings earlier is just how in-depth I had seen through Nintendo's facade. And the word I used there was not right. What I meant to say was I felt like I was doing what any reasonable person would do, by peeling back the layers and thinking deeply about, do I actually respect this company or not? Was this company really as good as I remember it being? And I have to admit that I really don't think Nintendo has ever been as great of a company as I've thought them to be. Because when I actually took a great big look back at their history, just after making that video, when I say look, I mean I thought about everything I knew about their history. Their success has come at the expense of others, at every turn. The Super Nintendo, as I previously mentioned, was supposed to have a CD-based add-on developed by Sony, called the Nintendo Super CD. Now, the actual reason that add-on was even created is because Sony heard that one of their employees made the sound chip. And that's why they wanted to make this CD add-on. Now, the real reason why the add-on fell through is because Nintendo wanted to have complete control over the income generated from the add-on. They would have made all the profit and left Sony high and dry for their effort. Sony realized that they were going to be getting the shortest end of the stick and abandoned Nintendo's wishes and went off to go and make their own system. Philips got suckered in, and well, they created the CD Interactive, or CDI, Compact Disc Interactive, whatever you want to call it, and made a bunch of CDI exclusive Nintendo games that ended up being horrible. Nintendo only made the Super Nintendo for the purpose of competing with the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation. Just the same as they created the Nintendo 64, right? They created the Nintendo 64 to compete with the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. Just the same that they created the Super Nintendo to compete with the Sega Genesis and the Mega CD and the 32X. And it's ironic. You know, Sony saw through their facade that early. They realized that Nintendo was just, they were going to take all the profit because they wanted all the profit. Because Nintendo was consumed by avarice even back then. Because they had an inflated ego because of the success, the runaway success of their first console, their first official, big console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, known in Japan as the Nintendo Family Computer, or Famicom for short. So they had to make a follow-up system to compete with the Sega Genesis, or the Sega Mega Drive, as it's also known. And so they created the Super Family Computer, or the Super Famicom. Now, true, there was a disk system add-on for the original Famicom. However, it never made it outside Japan, for God knows what reason. And when you go back to the GameCube's development, originally the GameCube games were developed using big cartridges, basically hard drive-sized cartridges. Back when it was known as Project Dolphin. You know, they used cartridges, and they ended up using micro DVDs to try and break down, to try and prevent, piracy. When they could have easily just taken a tip from Sony. Because Sony, how they prevented piracy of PS1 games is, rather than constructing CDs using the traditional method, which is just it's a regular soft sort of spiral pattern. Think of sort of like how a record is created, but it's on a microscopic scale. It's that same sort of idea. But instead of it being just a regular soft circle, the circle patterns, the circle data patterns on a Sony PlayStation disc were drawn, they were etched like squigglies, zigzags even. And the different zigzags on there, written into the different zigzags, were stuff like the region and what region it would work on and the name of the game and all that. And that was how they made sure that pirated games could not be made for their system. They found a creative way to prevent pirated games from being played, even though it's pretty easy to still play pirated games on their system if you do the hot swap method. That is very dangerous, and you can scratch your games that way. And also there's mod chips, but for the most part, for the people who didn't have easy access to that at all, it was an easy way to counteract piracy. Now, of course, Nintendo didn't have to worry about piracy of Super Nintendo games and Nintendo 64 games and NES games as much, because it's much harder to make a pirated NES game or SNES game or N64 game than it is to simply pirate a CD. Because when you pirate a CD, all you have to do is just rip the data from the CD, and you can just hot swap it on the PS1. That is, pull the official disc out while it's still running, and put the fake disc in its place, and that kind of thing. But with a Nintendo 64 game, you would have to have access to much more complicated equipment. You would need access to something. You'd need access to like a ROM reader, a ROM ripper, and you would need access to so many different things. It was just, the point is, it's harder. It was much harder back then to pirate cartridges than it was. It was a lot harder and a lot more expensive to pirate cartridges than it was to pirate CDs. And that's why Sony set up that anti-piracy method, so that it would be at least harder for the pirates to play the games, if nothing else. It would be harder for them to actually play them on physical hardware. Granted, nowadays you can just rip the CD onto your computer using something like WinCDMU, and then just play it on EPSXE or PCSX2, depending on if it's a PS1 or PS2 game, or if there's a Sega Dreamcast emulator out there. You can play it on that. Whatever. But the point is, by being consumed by the success of their past, Nintendo has, at least in my mind, they've condemned themselves for the foreseeable future. Because if you've noticed, they only really have first-party games keeping them afloat. That is to say that there are some third-party games out there, sure, but they're very few and far between as far as I've seen. It's like the same thing as Steam, for example. Steam has been spoiled because Valve themselves, they don't need to make another game in their lifetime. Steam itself makes them money. Steam itself, as well as the microtransactions they profit off of in Team Fortress 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and Dota 2, those games that they own, they profit off of all the microtransactions that happen in those games. Whether or not it's stuff that's bought from their markets or not, the transactions still occur in markets provided by them, so they get a cut of that transaction. Much the same, the Nintendo seal of approval, it has nothing to do with the quality of the games. It's got nothing to do with people strived back in the day. Companies strived back in the day to get that seal of approval, but it was nothing about the quality of the games. That's made readily apparent by games like LJN, by games created by LGN, horrible things like that, and even games by JVC. I think they made games for the NES, and Activision. It's pretty obvious at the seal of approval, the Nintendo seal of quality, that official seal that you see on every game on a Nintendo console, it's not there to tell you that the game is of quality. It's to tell you that the companies were willing to pay the royalty fee, so to speak. They were willing to pay the fee to have their game on a Nintendo console. It has nothing to do with the quality at all. That's not right. Star Wars Super Bombad Racing I believe that was on the GameCube. That was not a good game. What's another example? Like I was just saying, any of the LJN games released for the NES, none of them were even above average at all. It's just LJN had fairly deep pockets and could pay the fee to have the seal of quality on their games. Even the NES port of Smash TV wasn't that good. But again, Acclaim and Midway, they had deep pockets, so they could afford to, pay those fees. Games on the Super Nintendo. There are several games on the Super Nintendo that escape my mind at the moment. But, like, the point is, the seal of approval, it's not a seal of approval. It's not a seal, nor does it approve of anything, nor does it guarantee quality. It's just another way for Nintendo to make money. It's Nintendo's own little brand of Steam that they've had going 30 years prior. You want your game to be on my console? You better be willing to pay the fee. It's the same sort of thing. That's why I said in the video earlier that Nintendo was a gateway for developers, because it was a gateway platform for developers to make games that they wanted to make and to be recognized and to become better and better as companies. And they were just profiting off of that. I mean, sure, they had their games that sold well on their own platform, but that was only like a fraction of the money they made. The real money that they made was all the money they got from the people who paid the fee to have their games released on a Nintendo console. Because it was an honor to have your game on an NES back in the day, or a Super Nintendo. That's where the real money was at. But now they don't have that. They don't have even a 1/12 of that third-party support anymore. They may have ZeniMax's, or Bethesda's, whatever you want to call them now, because Bethesda's owned by ZeniMax, and they put Doom on that platform. They may have, that. But I don't think that's a very worthwhile affiliation. Doom 4 as a game is admissible as its own game, but it's lackluster as an entry into the Doom series. But I digress. Nintendo is literally keeping themselves afloat only through the nostalgia that people have through them. And I know I said that before, but it's worth reiterating. Well, that's basically all I have to say on that. I guess the next thing I wanted to address is this is more for the people that follow me on fanfiction.net. You're probably wondering where the hell I've been and why Chapter 6 of Blackout is taking so long to come out. Well, I kind of scraped upon this in the first part of the video, but it's because I've been dealing with real life and I haven't had the spark to go and write more about Zootopia Blackout yet. Like, writing chapters for that story, writing in general for me comes in bursts, and I have to be inspired. I have to want to write the next part of the story. So, in other words, I get to it when I get to it. That's not, a great response, but that's what it is. It is what it is. My throat is so damn dry right now, and I have a bottle of Powerade next to me, but I haven't had a single sip of it yet. Because I don't care. I really don't. It's just, this subject, it irks me every time I think of it. Every time I see a Nintendo product, especially when I see an Animal Crossing product. Sorry. It irks me and it bothers me. Really, when I see anything from Nintendo, it bothers me. Because I see it. And I see, Nintendo. And I'm reminded of my childhood. It brings me right back to my childhood. Of when I used to play a bunch of classic Nintendo games and enjoy them. And then I'm reminded that I used to, at least to an extent, like this company. But I don't anymore. I don't know if I ever really did, as I previously stated. Because now that I've gone back and thought about Nintendo as a whole, all the stuff they've done in the past to ensure their success, everyone they've stepped over, Sony, Argonaut Games, Rareware to an extent, All these companies that they've stepped over just in the name of keeping themselves afloat. They are a greedy company. And it's disturbing to think that people still support them. And they support them because they're nostalgic for them. Like, hey, Nintendo, it's that old company that I used to like, They made awesome games. But that's the takeaway from this video, is I want you to think, did I like Nintendo, the company, or did I just like the games they made? Was the experience I had with their games, was that because of the company itself, or because the game itself was good? For me, I enjoyed the games. The company was an afterthought. What they did, the blood, sweat, and tears they poured into it, was an afterthought for me as a kid. And I never really stopped to think about that until recently. But they put a lot more time and effort into those games back then. They didn't care what it was. I mean, Satoru Iwata, he put everything he had. He worked himself sick to make sure that games hit deadlines. He went out to where Pokemon Gold was being worked on. Gold, Silver, and Crystal were being worked on. And he made sure that they were released on time. He went out to the Ape Studios, the guys that worked on Earthbound / Mother 2, which I also mentioned. I have a physical copy of that, the Japanese version. He went out there and made sure that hit the deadline. He made sure Super Smash Bros. Hit the deadline. Because in his time, as a higher up in Nintendo and eventually the president of Nintendo, he made sure that the games were he made sure that the games were weren't just admissible. He made sure they were good games. That they were as great as the games that made Nintendo a namesake back in the 80s. He wanted to continue the legacy left behind by the last presidents of Nintendo. But it seems like no one has that intention of continuing that. That's why, not just with Nintendo, but just the modern day gaming industry as a whole, that's why I'm so uninterested in it. That's why there are very few games that pique my interest. That's why there's very few modern pieces of media that hit my interest, because everything just feels so stagnant and repetitive, and the industry is just all about money now. It's not about what the fans want or about making a great product. It's just about the money. There are only very few games I can say that were truly there for the experience. One of those games I can actually certainly say was all about the experience was Lisa the Painful, and that's not even by a third-party or first-party developer. That's just by some random team of friends who wanted to make a game. And it's better than most of the third-party and first-party stuff I've played in a long while. I don't want to drag this on for too long, but I just hope that everyone will understand why I'm veering away from modern games and why I'm not doing any of that, why you haven't seen me upload a lot in a while. It's just because I've had a grand disinterest in uploading and doing anything to have anything to do with technology. I've been focusing most of my efforts on life, and it's really given me a different outlook on the gaming industry as a whole, what my interests are, where my interests should be in the gaming world. I don't see Nintendo as being something to invest in worthwhile. I don't see it as a worthwhile investment. After making that video, the one I just recorded, I actually thought about smashing my copy of Breath of the Wild. Actually, I'm not even kidding. I thought about that. But that would just be money wasted. You know what? I may just trade it in. Who knows? Anyways, that... I'm so disappointed with so many different companies nowadays. I'm disappointed. It transcends just being about Nintendo, but Nintendo is the worst offender, make no mistake. I mean, I'm disappointed with Konami. I'm disappointed with Capcom, with Squaresoft, with Microsoft. I don't care that they're called Square Enix now. I still call them Squaresoft, because that's how I knew them as a kid. And that's how I will continue to recognize them, is Squaresoft. I'm disappointed with those companies because Konami has, much like Nintendo, been inflated by their own greed, and so now they're just, and that's ultimately caused them to collapse in on themselves, and they're relying on pachinko machines for income. Squaresoft promised a remake of Secret of Mana, and what we got was a very hollow, lackluster, at most, remake. It felt rushed, incomplete. The soundtrack was very much hit or miss. I'd say a 75% miss, 25% hit. I said Squaresoft already. Capcom. I mean, Capcom lost my support 7 years ago when they canceled Mega Man Legends, because that's something I was looking forward to playing. Because Mega Man Legends, as I've said before, is my favorite Mega Man game of all time. That's my favorite Mega Man series of all time, is Mega Man Legends. I love it to death. And they canceled that. And Mega Man Universe. And they didn't really have any justifiable reasons to back it up, saying that the fans didn't provide enough input. And that's false. You can watch Alpha Mega Sins videos on that. Microsoft, they bought out Rareware and made it a shell of its former self, you know? Rareware, the fact that they did Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts rather than, I would have been fine if they released Banjo 3 on the Xbox 360, as long as it was a proper sequel to Banjo-Tooie, you know? But Microsoft themselves, they're milking Halo for all it's worth. Halo was supposed... I don't know how many people remember this, but Halo was supposed to end on Halo 3. But they wanted one more Halo game, so Bungie made Halo Reach, and that was supposed to be their very end. It was supposed to be sort of like how the Metal Gear series was supposed to end on Metal Gear Solid 3. But then Konami wanted more Metal Gear games, and of course the fans wanted another run with Solid Snake before the end. So they made Metal Gear Solid Portable Ops, and they made Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 4, which were all cool games. All had great effort put in them. And then it just felt lackluster by Metal Gear Solid 5. There's just stuff missing from it. And the fact that they divided the whole intro, the opening part of the game, the whole opening chapter of the game, Ground Zeroes, they cut that off as its own individual game, a $30 demo. id Software, Bethesda, for half-assing Doom. And most insulting is that people actually say this is the best entry into the Doom series. That's what insults me as an old fan of Doom. I've been playing Doom. I'm only 20 years old. I'm going to be 21 on October 20th of this year. I'm going to be 21 years old. And I've been playing Doom for about 18 years of my entire life. I've been playing Doom since I was 4 years old. 3 or 4 years old. Just about. And I find that I'm insulted. I'm offended that people are saying this is a true successor to the ideas of the original Doom. It's fun, it's mindless, but it is not what Doom originally was at all. And Doom Eternal, Doom 5, whatever you want to call it, doesn't look any better. In my opinion. It just looks so bland and uninteresting. That's why I miss the days of old. Because people actually cared about the quality of the games they were releasing. These projects, they were ambitious back in the days. Doom was an ambitious project for id Software back in 1993. Wolfenstein 3D was an ambitious project. Quake was ambitious. Super Metroid was ambitious. If Nintendo back in the day didn't care at all about the quality of the games they were releasing back then, Super Metroid would not have been an award-winning game. That game is literally award-winning as far as I can remember. That is up there. It is one of the most legendary games ever created. It's right up there with Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, Super Mario Bros. 3, Doom, Wolfenstein 3D. Because back then, you don't hear about many games attaining that level of praise anymore. Because the companies just simply don't care enough anymore about the games they're making. I think that's about it. I don't know what else to say. My throat is utterly dry and destroyed right now. I can only hope my voice goes back to normal after I drink something, but I doubt it will. It'll still be just as brittle and dry and messed up and everything else. I just wanted to finish putting my thoughts out there because this has disturbed me, and I have not been able to sleep well the past couple of nights because of several things, because of sickness, because of the stress of life, because of many things. And it's only come back to this. I don't want to depress you guys any further with this talk at all. I really don't, but I feel like it needs to be said. At the end of the day, it needs to be said. Beyond any kind of reasoning, I just needed to say it. And I'm very calm, I'm very collected about this. I've not said more than 3 or 4 swear words throughout the entirety of this video. That's how serious about this I am. I told someone on the video, on that video, I even said, and I meant to say it at the beginning of the video, that video, I want to apologize for that video because it was an abstract, spontaneous, constant outpour of just everything that came to mind. It just went right out of my mouth without ever being processed. And I told someone, I promised them that I would make a reprisal of that video, of my thoughts, and go into greater depth on it. And I'm pretty sure I've done that with this video. I'm pretty sure I've made my views very clear about Nintendo and about everything. I've made my views very clear. So, I'm pretty sure this is all I need to say now. This is an extra long video, but I just want all of you to understand that. Thank you so much for watching. God bless every last one of you that has stuck around my channel these past 3-4 years, I think it's been now. Thank all of you. Give yourselves a pat on the back for sticking around this long, for enduring this long and being this patient with an idiot like me. And I hope all of you have a good one. Alright. I'll see you whenever. Goodbye.